Lee Hyun-sung sat in a corner, his posture stiff yet relaxed, as if he had been dozing off like a soldier on duty. When he noticed Dokja stirring awake, he straightened himself and acknowledged him with a polite nod. Dokja observed the faint traces of exhaustion on Hyun-sung's face and decided to strike up a conversation. Hyun-sung admitted that he must have briefly fallen asleep, his tone slightly apologetic. Dokja mentioned, with a touch of amusement, that Hyun-sung had been murmuring in his sleep, calling himself Private Hyun-sung Lee. Hyun-sung appeared embarrassed as he explained that it must have been a remnant of his early military days, a period that had evidently left its mark on him. Dokja, recalling what he knew, remarked on the rarity of promotions during compulsory service. Hyun-sung explained that he had been promoted to a commissioned officer near the end of his service, though his humble tone suggested he didn't view it as a significant achievement. Dokja noted inwardly that such a promotion was indeed uncommon, and implied a strong sense of discipline and capability. Despite Hyun-sung's modesty, Dokja couldn't help but think about the weight of his military past, something not detailed in novel. He reflected on how difficult it must have been for Hyun-sung, though the man himself remained stoic about his experiences. Breaking the silence, Dokja expressed his relief and gratitude for Hyun-sung's presence. He acknowledged how having someone like Hyun-sung on their side brought a sense of safety and protection, qualities that were invaluable in their dire circumstances. Hyun-sung offered a faint but comforting smile. Though weak, it carried a sense of reassurance. After exchanging brief greetings with Hyun-sung, Dokja left his side and approached Senga and Hee-won, who were nearby. He leaned closer to them, speaking quietly about what he had in mind. Dokja explained the need for their actions, subtly suggesting that they do what he had demonstrated earlier. He shared his concern for Hyun-sung, pointing out that the man had been feeling down lately. Dokja believed that showing encouragement and support might lift Hyun-sung's spirits and help him regain confidence. In his thoughts, Dokja analyzed the situation. According to the novel, Hyun-sung's attribute should have awakened while defending the group from the Cholsu gang at Gyumho Station. However, in this timeline, it was Hee-won who underwent that transformation instead. Dokja knew he needed to help Hyun-sung blossom his attribute to prepare for the challenges ahead. At the same time, he remained cautious about Junghyuk-Yu's plans and the potential threat of Pildu-gong. The stakes were rising, and Dokja had to ensure their group was ready for what lay ahead. Senga, determined to help, expressed her willingness to cheer Hyun-sung on. She hoped he could return to his former self, the strong and dependable person they all admired. Hee-won, with her usual sharp wit, made a comment about Dokja's insight, but he brushed it off, clarifying that it was simply a skill of his that helped him understand others better. Before stepping away, Dokja reminded them to take turns encouraging Hyun-sung, emphasizing how much their support could mean to him. Later, Hee-won approached Hyun-sung and sat beside him. She spoke to him with sincerity, likening him to a large pine tree, unchanging and steadfast. Hyun-sung chuckled softly, expressing his gratitude for her kind sentiment. Hyun-sung, feeling content, mentioned how his favorite song during his military days was Green Pine Tree. Hee-won, unimpressed and disinterested, didn't hide her lack of enthusiasm, leaving Hyun-sung feeling slightly sullen. A notification appeared, confirming that Hee-won's attempt had failed. Dokja sighed as he observed the interaction, noting that it was now Senga's turn to step in. Senga approached Hyun-sung with a warm and encouraging tone. She spoke of how she admired his strong sense of justice, a trait she found rare and inspiring. Hyun-sung, taken aback by her words, hesitated before expressing his gratitude. Her words made him reflect on the meaning of justice, and a notification appeared, signaling that his thoughts were now focused on that concept. He thanked Senga, though his voice was humble, revealing how much her words had touched him. Dokja, watching from a distance, felt a sense of relief as the interaction unfolded as he had hoped. Next, it was Gil-young's turn. The boy approached Hyun-sung confidently and commented on his impressive muscles. Hyun-sung chuckled at the innocent yet genuine compliment, and for the first time, he seemed visibly at ease. Dokja, observing this, realized just how low maintenance Hyun-sung truly was. His simplicity had made the plan much easier than expected. With Hyun-sung's spirits lifted, Dokja felt reassured that everything was progressing smoothly. Dokja praised Gil-yong for his efforts and asked if he had looked into a specific matter. Gil-yong confirmed, sharing that the person Dokja was seeking was on the first basement floor. Dokja thanked him and, with his next steps in mind, began heading upstairs. He prepared himself mentally, ready to scout for talent that could strengthen their group. As Dokja ascended the stairs, the members of the Landlord Alliance greeted him with mocking hostility. One of Pildu's henchmen taunted him, calling him a squatter and ridiculing him for surviving the night without a room. The man assumed Junghyuk must have helped Dokja, but Dokja ignored the remarks entirely. His focus was elsewhere as he carefully counted the remaining green zones on each floor. He made a mental note of every zone. For his plan to succeed, he couldn't afford to overlook a single detail. As Dokja ascended the stairs, Pildu's henchmen continued to mock him, his voice dripping with condescension. The man jeered, asking if it was difficult being Junghyuk's lackey. He went further, suggesting Dokja join the Landlord Alliance, claiming that Pildu might consider letting him in, provided he brought the women from his group along as part of the deal. His laughter carried a sinister undertone, but Dokja remained calm, focusing on his steps. The number of green zones on each floor had decreased significantly since the previous day's scenario. Now there were only 11 zones remaining. Dokja mentally calculated as he ascended, realizing how tight the situation had become. He responded casually to the henchman, telling him to inform Pildu that he would think about the offer. The henchman and his companions followed behind, their mocking voices growing louder, but Dokja paid them no further attention. Reaching the basement's first floor, Dokja continued up the escalator, his mind absorbed in his calculations. Suddenly, a blade was pressed to his neck, so quickly and silently that he barely had time to react. Only one skill in the early stages of the scenarios could boast this level of concealed movement: Ghost Walk. The presence of the blade confirmed the identity of its user, Lee Ji-hye. Her tone carried a hint of disappointment as she addressed Dokja, questioning his actions and reminding him of the consequences of making any deals with Pildu's group. Dokja remained composed, knowing that Hee-won would not hesitate to kill them all if it came to that. Ji-hye, however, pressed further, asking why he hadn't simply killed the Landlord Alliance members the previous night. Dokja calmly explained that he had come to talk, not to fight. Ji-hye lowered the blade slightly but remained wary. She asked what he wanted and why he had sought her out. Dokja observed her closely, noting her remarkable speed and skill. He questioned why she was stationed there, to which Ji-hye revealed that she was guarding the area on Junghyuk's orders, allowing no one to pass, not even Dokja. In his mind, Dokja quickly pieced together Junghyuk's intentions, realizing he needed to act quickly to move his plan forward. With measured words, he told Ji-hye why he was truly there. He needed her help to take down Pildu and his group that very day. Ji-hye's eyes lit up with interest as she heard his plan, showing a rare trace of delight. A notification appeared, signaling that Dokja's understanding of Ji-hye had deepened. He continued, explaining that there was a way to succeed, but it required her cooperation. Without her help, the situation would escalate, and most of the people in the station would end up dead. Ji-hye, skeptical and hardened by her experiences, dismissed his words, stating that death was inevitable. Her response betrayed the influence of Junghyuk's harsh ideology. Dokja pressed further, bringing up the broadcast of her first scenario in the subway. He mentioned how he had seen her during that harrowing time, recalling the moment she killed her classmates. His words struck a nerve, leaving her visibly disturbed. Her voice rose in anger, demanding that he stop. She shouted, asking what he could possibly know about her pain. Dokja admitted he didn't know much, but he urged her to act now. If she refused to help, it would lead to a regret she would carry for the rest of her life. His words, spoken with conviction, left a deep impression. Later, when Dokja regrouped with Hee-won and Senga, Hee-won questioned whether Ji-hye would agree to their plan. Dokja admitted that Ji-hye had a temper, but she didn't seem as cold-hearted as she wanted others to believe. He believed there was a chance she would come through for them. Checking his phone, Dokja saw that the time had come. The night ahead would be even more dangerous than the one before. He addressed the group with urgency, reminding them that everything needed to proceed as planned. Time was their enemy now, and they had to act before the Landlord Coalition became aware of their movements. Dokja quickly assigned tasks, sending Hee-won, Senga, and Gil-yong to their respective floors to carry out their missions. As they departed, Dokja began climbing the stairs with Hyun-sung. Despite his imposing physique, Hyun-sung's voice carried a distinct lack of confidence as he spoke. He admitted his doubts, confessing that the others were counting on him, but he felt unsure of his abilities. His insecurities, rooted in years of being overlooked, weighed heavily on him. Dokja offered reassurance, stating his trust in Hyun-sung's capabilities. He reminded Hyun-sung that this operation relied heavily on him, though inwardly Dokja was taken aback. This self-doubt wasn't something he had read about in 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. Dokja, sensing Hyun-sung's need for connection, promised to hear more about his past when everything was over. Hyun-sung hesitated, admitting that talking to Dokja felt strangely familiar, as if they had known each other for a long time. Notifications appeared in Dokja's vision, indicating that Hyun-sung was beginning to open up, and that Dokja's understanding of him had increased significantly. Hyun-sung, flustered, tried to downplay his words, struggling to articulate his feelings further. As they continued, their conversation was abruptly interrupted by a voice filled with arrogance. A group of middle-aged men emerged, members of the Chungmuro Landlord Alliance. The one leading them addressed Dokja mockingly, recognizing him as someone associated with Yoo Jung-hyuk. The man assumed Dokja had come to negotiate. His tone shifted as he scanned the area, questioning the absence of the women in Dokja's group. The leader of the alliance then revealed his cruelty, holding a trembling woman by her hair. Her voice, filled with desperation, pleaded for help. The man smirked as he dismissed the woman's cries, mentioning with arrogance that she had refused to sell her room. His words were dripping with cruelty, but his confidence faltered when Hyun-sung's sharp voice cut through the tension, demanding that the woman be let go. The man turned to Hyun-sung, incredulous and filled with disdain, demanding to know who he was to give such an order. Hyun-sung, silent, glanced at Dokja, his eyes seeking approval. Dokja gave a firm nod, signaling him to act. At that moment, a notification appeared before Dokja, indicating that Hyun-sung wanted to practice justice of his own will, and that he was on the verge of evolution. The allied members of the Landlord Alliance, sensing the shift in atmosphere, drew their weapons, exuding an intimidating momentum. Dokja remained calm, quickly checking the time. It was the perfect moment to execute the plan. Without hesitation, he used his coins to boost his stats, preparing for what was to come. Suddenly, the sound of small explosions echoed throughout the subway, followed by the chaos of startled screams and confusion. It was the signal. The Alliance members were thrown into disarray as they frantically searched for the source of the blasts. Seizing the moment, Dokja acted swiftly. With a single precise strike of his blade, he severed the arm of the man who had been holding the woman's hair. Blood gushed from the wound, and the man screamed in agony. His confidence shattered in an instant. Amid the chaos, Dokja dashed forward, shouting for Hyun-sung to follow. Hyun-sung, his hesitation gone, charged after Dokja with unwavering determination. Their sudden attack left the Alliance members scrambling to react, their shouts of rage echoing in the corridors. The two pressed on, their movements precise and unrelenting. They soon reached a corridor on the B2 floor, the private territory of Gongpil-do. Alliance members stationed there quickly spotted them and began shouting commands to surround them. The situation intensified with the enemy regrouping and closing in. Dokja had no intention of fighting all of the Alliance members head on. As the clash was about to begin, Hyun-sung moved in front of him, raising a steel shield with unwavering determination. In that moment, a notification appeared, indicating that Hyun-sung had activated the Stigma Great Mountain Push level. With a deafening roar, Hyun-sung unleashed his immense strength, sending the Alliance members tumbling like dominoes. The sheer force of his attack left their formation in shambles, creating an opening. As they advanced deeper into the territory, another notification flashed. Dokja had invaded private property, and in response, Gongpil-do activated Armed Zone level. Turrets began to emerge from all corners of the area, their barrels glowing ominously with red magic bullets ready to fire. Realizing the imminent danger, Dokja rushed ahead of Hyun-sung, intent on confronting the threat. Before he could act, Hyun-sung called out in alarm and threw his shield with all his might. Dokja caught the shield midair, but before he could react further, a turret fired. The impact hit him like a cannon, the force pushing him backward. Explosions erupted around them, shaking the entire space as the turrets unleashed a relentless barrage. Despite the heavy hits, Dokja managed to remain standing. A notification informed him that his stamina had reached over level 20, and his body, now as durable as armor, absorbed the brunt of the damage. In the midst of the chaos, Gongpil-do appeared, a cunning smile playing across his face. His confidence radiated as he mocked Dokja, clearly aware of the intruder's weakened state. A notification followed, stating that Dokja's stats were being reduced by the effects of Gongpil-do's private property skill. Dokja observed Gongpil-do carefully, realizing that Pildu must have upgraded his militarized zone skill. The oppressive presence of the armed zone became more evident as red magic power began gathering around the turrets, preparing for an attack. The true strength of Pildu's armed zone lay in its synergy with the private land debuff. As long as the combination was intact, very few incarnations stood a chance against Gongpil-do's overwhelming defense. The turrets aimed, and Pildu coldly commanded the end of his opponents. The enhanced magic bullets were moments away from firing when sudden commotion erupted in the distance. The wounded members of the Landlord Alliance stumbled toward Pildu, their frantic cries breaking through the tension. Dokja noticed the injuries they carried, deep wounds inflicted by something sharp. It was clear that Ji-hye had acted, her long blade cutting through their ranks. This was the opening they needed. Dokja turned to Hyun-sung, who stood frozen with hesitation. The air grew heavy as Dokja's words pierced through the chaos. Hyun-sung's fists clenched tightly, his body trembling with determination. At that moment, a notification flashed before Dokja's eyes. The character Hyun-sung's attribute is blossoming. A blinding light surrounded Hyun-sung, and a silver aura radiated from his body, growing in intensity as his transformation took place. Dokja observed the scene with a sense of awe. This was all part of the plan, to awaken Hyun-sung's potential. He couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. This was one of his favorite moments from 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, now unfolding before his eyes. In TWSA, Hyun-sung had been one of the strongest supporting characters, and his unmatched strength during moments like this had cemented his role. A notification appeared, confirming the moment's significance. A new stigma has been unlocked with the blossoming of Hyun-sung's attribute. The stigma, Great Mountain Crush, has been activated. Pale magic power gathered around Hyun-sung's fists, and his arms grew to an incredible size, far beyond normal human proportions. With a powerful roar, he slammed his fist into the ground. The impact was deafening. The sound echoed throughout the space, and fragments of the shattered floor flew into the air. The Alliance members cried out in shock, unable to comprehend the sudden shift in power. Cracks rippled through the ground, spreading in all directions. The once stable positions of the turrets shifted, throwing off their aim. Magic bullets meant for Dokja and Hyun-sung now misfired, hitting the wrong targets. Explosions erupted, and thick clouds of dust filled the area. Amid the chaos, the ground began to tremble violently. Vibrations spread as the structure beneath them gave way. A notification confirmed the outcome. The Green Zone and Gong Pildu's private land has been destroyed. Hyun-sung turned to Dokja, his voice steady but filled with a hint of emotion. He reminded Dokja of a promise made earlier. Hyun-sung had said that when everything was over, he wanted to share his story. Now he expressed his desire to hear Dokja's story in return, to understand him better. Dokja found the request peculiar. A character from a novel he had read now wanted to learn more about him. The situation felt surreal, but he did not dwell on it for too long. Dokja added that his story might not be interesting, but Hyun-sung simply smiled and responded that he was still curious. Their conversation was interrupted by a faint, desperate voice calling for help. Both Dokja and Hyun-sung turned toward the sound, moving cautiously toward the collapsed ground where it originated. Hyun-sung reminded Dokja that they had more pressing matters to address before anything else. Gong Pildu, visibly shaken and enraged, clenched his teeth and glared at them. His frustration boiled over, but Dokja met his gaze with a calm grin. Dokja then made a cutting remark, referencing a time when private property was non-existent, a subtle jab at Pildu's obsession with his domain. The sound of footsteps broke through the tension. Dokja turned toward the source of the voice calling his name. It was Hee-won, returning from her task. She approached confidently and reported that she had destroyed all the rooms as instructed. Her tone carried a mix of pride and surprise, as she admitted she hadn't realized rooms could be destroyed in such a way. She explained that the group had bashed the floor, causing it to collapse. Dokja's plan was falling into place. Earlier, he had directed Senga, Lee Gil-young, and Hee-won to target smaller green zones, ensuring the areas with less than 3 occupants were dealt with first. The strategy had been executed perfectly, leaving only Gong Pildu's zones intact. Dokja acknowledged Hee-won's efforts with a small smile, pleased with how smoothly the plan was progressing. Just then, the dokkaebi communication window opened, revealing Bae-hyung. The dokkaebi appeared agitated, his frustration evident as he berated Dokja for his actions. He shouted about the chaos in Cheongmuro, caused by the destruction of the green zones, claiming that all the dokkaebi in the area were in an uproar. Dokja remained calm, cutting through Bae-hyung's tirade with a curt response. He had already dealt with enough disturbances from the barrage of messages sent by the constellations. However, Bae-hyung's tone grew even more frantic. He reminded Dokja that his was not the only channel active in Cheongmuro and questioned if Dokja truly understood the consequences of his actions. Dokja then directed the conversation toward Gong Pildu's channel, asking about its owner. Bae-hyung reluctantly revealed that the channel belonged to BIR, designated as BIR 3642. Dokja quickly pieced the information together, recalling that BIR had previously encroached on Bae-hyung's channel and attracted an audience composed mostly of thrill-seeking constellations. Turning his attention to Ji-hae, Dokja asked if she had completed her task. Ji-hae confirmed without hesitation. Earlier, Dokja had requested her assistance to target the green zones with larger capacities, ranging from 5 to 8 occupants, areas that would have been too challenging for Hee-won to handle alone. Ji-hae's skill and efficiency reflected her status as a disciple of Jung-hyuk and the incarnation of the sacred hero. Dokja considered the situation carefully. The destruction of the green zones had stirred up tension among the other survivors. Now, with their safety compromised, emotions were running high. As if on cue, Ji-hae gestured toward a group approaching in the distance. The Alliance members charged forward, their anger palpable as they wielded bats and metal pipes with the intent to attack. Their voices rose in a collective shout, calling out for Ji-hae and urging each other to eliminate their targets. Among the chaos, Gong Pildu's name was screamed as a rallying cry. The dokkaebi, watching with a sinister grin, made an amused comment, clearly reveling in the unfolding chaos. A system notification immediately followed, announcing the start of a new scenario. The constellations of channel BIR 3642 had placed a bounty on Dokja, labeled labeling him as the target for elimination. The reward was set, and the scenario's objectives were clear. Jihei glanced at Dokja, her expression hardening. She made it clear she would not be assisting him this time. Dokja, however, remained unbothered, stating confidently that her help would not be necessary. Heewon joined the conversation, her tone playful, yet laced with curiosity as she questioned the worth of the bounty. While the reward seemed insufficient to tempt her, she didn't miss the chance to joke about a higher price potentially changing her stance. Hyun-sung stepped forward, his protective nature shining through as he positioned himself between Dokja and the Alliance. Dokja took the opportunity to examine Hyun-sung's character profile once more. His attribute, the man who regained a sense of justice, reaffirmed his role as a steadfast ally. Dokja calmly inquired about Hyun-sung's remaining stamina and the number of times he could use the skill he had demonstrated earlier. Hyun-sung's response was measured, estimating only 2 more uses at most. Gil-young also readied himself for the confrontation, but Dokja stopped him before he could act, urging him to stay calm. Dokja recalled fragments from the novel. He couldn't pinpoint the exact chapter, but he remembered Jung-hyuk driven to madness by countless regressions, destroying all the green zones upon his arrival in Cheongmuro. Now, the conditions mirrored that moment, unfolding just as he had read. Hostility surrounded them. Landowners and tenants, blinded by the promise of the bounty, directed their rage toward Dokja and his group. The atmosphere grew heavier as the third main scenario, emergency defense, was renewed. The updated conditions were devastating. All the green zones in the region were destroyed, and monsters that were meant to appear gradually over the remaining days had instead been unleashed all at once. The objective was clear: survive the flood of monsters until the scenario's end. The penalty for failure was death. The defense game had begun. Before anyone could process the full weight of the situation, screams erupted. The cries of monsters echoed beyond the shattered screen doors. A wave of beasts surged forward like a violent living tide. The chaos was immediate. Some Alliance members were struck down as Grolls tore into them without hesitation. Panic spread as the remaining people watched the carnage with horror, their faces pale with fear. The platform turned into a frenzy. Dokja's voice cut through the chaos as he commanded Hyun-sung and the others to head for the transit stairs. He led his companions, moving swiftly to escape the encroaching flood of monsters. Behind them, the platform was engulfed in a sea of chaos. By the time they reached the upper level, a group of desperate survivors followed close behind, their fear propelling them forward. But Dokja turned and blocked their path, stopping them in their tracks. Confusion and anger mixed in the faces of the Alliance members as they demanded to pass. Dokja's expression remained cold as he explained the futility of their attempts. Survival was not guaranteed, not even on the upper levels. Dokja unsheathed his blade, the Unbroken Faith, and activated its skill, the Blade of Faith. With precise timing, he struck the transfer stairs. A deafening crash followed as the center of the staircase collapsed. The sound of crumbling metal and desperate screams filled the air as several people fell with it. It was a harsh decision, but one Dokja deemed necessary. There were no longer any green zones left in Cheongmuro. Dokja addressed the remaining survivors, his voice cutting through their panic. He declared that there was only one way to survive now: by fighting. The crowd erupted in anger, their fear turning to fury as they blamed him for the destruction of the green zones. Their demands for an alternative fell on deaf ears. While the chaos intensified, Hyun-sung acted without hesitation. He ran toward the transit stairs they had just climbed and shattered them completely, cutting off any retreat. The crowd's shouts turned to screams of despair as Hyun-sung moved to destroy another staircase, leaving only one intact path. The survivors' anger boiled over as they realized their escape routes were gone. Among them, Jihei's expression darkened with frustration. This wasn't what she had expected. The destruction of the green zones and the collapsing staircases had pushed the situation to its breaking point. Despite her protests, Dokja remained resolute, his plan clear in his mind. Dokja activated his skill, Bookmark, selecting the third bookmark. With it, he triggered Inho's skill, Insight, directing its influence toward Gongpildu and the terrified crowd. The skill's effects rippled through the panicked survivors, amplifying their desperation. Dokja's voice rang out once more as he addressed Gongpildu directly. He pointed out Pildu's potential, goading him into action. With Pildu's power, he claimed the situation could be salvaged and lives could be saved. Pildu's expression twisted in anger, but the murmurs of the crowd quickly grew louder. The power of Insight took hold, and the frightened survivors turned their focus toward Pildu. Their pleas echoed around him, begging for his help and urging him to use his power. Finally, Pildu relented repented, shouting to the Alliance members to gather around him. With a growl of frustration, Pildu barked orders. He began setting up his skill, Militarized Zone, but it required time. Until then, the Alliance members were tasked with holding the monsters back. The scene descended into brutality. Blood painted the ground as screams tore through the air. People were caught in the wave of monstrous attacks, some losing limbs, others collapsing under the relentless assault. Dokja turned to Senga, calling her name with urgency. Without needing further instruction, Senga immediately understood her role. Her skill, Binding Thread, came to life, snaking through the chaos to reach those unable to fight. One by one, the injured and terrified tenants were lifted to safety. Clinging to the threads, they were pulled upstairs, away from the bloodbath below. Grateful voices trembled as they thanked her, their faces pale with fear. Amid the carnage, Dokja's sharp voice carried over the chaos. His question to the crowd was piercing. Were they still after the bounty? The weight of his words was soon followed by the sound of a notification. The time limit for the bounty scenario had expired. The bounty on Dokja was officially removed. A faint smile tugged at Dokja's lips as he spoke, his tone almost mocking. The opportunity to claim the bounty was gone, and it was too late for regrets now. One of the younger survivors, overwhelmed by guilt and terror, stammered an apology. Gong Pildu roared, his voice filled with determination and frustration as he pushed the limits of his abilities. His skill, Private Property, activated with overwhelming force. Mechanical sounds echoed through the battlefield as 5 turrets emerged from the ground, their barrels glowing with condensed red magic bullets. The turrets opened fire, unleashing a relentless barrage. The ground rats shrieked in agony as the bullets tore through them, while the Grolls momentarily faltered, unable to withstand the onslaught. Around him, the group of survivors cheered in relief and admiration, their cries of hope piercing through the chaos. The effectiveness of Pildu's power was undeniable. In a defense scenario like this, Gong Pildu's combat potential was unmatched, solidifying his reputation as one of the infamous 10 evils. Hyunsung observed the scene, noting the strain such a powerful stigma might place on Pildu. He questioned whether Pildu's mana reserves would last through the relentless battle. Dokja, however, dismissed the concern. Pildu's skill, while formidable, was designed to be mana efficient. For now, Pildu could hold his own without issue. Meanwhile, Hyewon leaned back, half-jokingly wondering if this moment of reprieve would allow her to rest. Dokja responded with a dry remark, reminding her that being part of his group afforded certain advantages not shared by the less fortunate below. The battlefield shifted as Pildu's rage-filled screams echoed. Despite the turret's relentless fire, the number of monsters seemed endless. 1 hour into the battle, Pildu was still fighting, his movements growing more desperate as he struggled to keep the monsters at bay. The tide of beasts showed no sign of stopping. Pildu's shouts grew louder, filled with frustration and exhaustion as he cursed the monsters swarming his zone. Blood and sweat covered him, his determination unwavering even as his body showed signs of wear. Then came a surge of power. Notifications appeared, signaling the growth of Pildu's abilities. His arm zone leveled up, bolstering its firepower. His Private Property skill grew stronger, and his Militarized Zone gained new capabilities. Finally, Pildu acquired a new skill, Barrier. Dokja observed the situation closely, his thoughts focused on Pildu's progress. The continuous leveling up must have put Pildu's supporting constellation in a difficult position. Sponsoring such rapid growth required significant resources, and Dokja wondered how much longer the constellation could sustain it. Jihei watched Pildu struggle with amusement, her laughter echoing through the space. She pointed out how Pildu already looked exhausted, as if he had aged during the battle. Dokja noted her change in demeanor. Moments earlier, she had insisted that he should step in to help the group. Now, she seemed to revel in their plight. Her attitude was unsurprising, a reflection of the teachings of Jung-hyuk, her mentor. Meanwhile, Hyewon had somehow managed to fall asleep. Her calmness in the chaos was almost baffling. Dokja glanced at her briefly before turning his attention back to Jihei. He questioned her about Jung-hyuk's whereabouts, to which she replied dismissively, stating that he was always busy. Dokja's thoughts darkened. Of course, Jung-hyuk was busy looking out for himself as always. He pressed Jihei for more details, asking when Jung-hyuk had entered the dungeon. She recalled that it had been around 9 in the morning. Realization struck Jihei as she questioned how Dokja knew about the dungeon at all. Ignoring her suspicion, Dokja checked his phone. The time read 8 p.m. It had been nearly 11 hours since Jung-hyuk entered the dungeon, and he still hadn't emerged. This was concerning. Something wasn't right. Dokja sighed in frustration. It was clear he would have to act. Turning his attention to Baehyung, the dokkaebi responsible for overseeing the scenario, Dokja demanded access to the shop. Baehyung, however, was preoccupied, gleefully boasting about the surge in his subscriber count. His channel's popularity had skyrocketed during the chaos, and he was clearly enjoying the moment. Dokja's tone sharpened. If Baehyung didn't open the shop immediately, the dokkaebi could risk losing all his subscribers. Begrudgingly, Baehyung complied, pausing his broadcast under the pretense of taking a short break for his channel. The shop interface appeared before Dokja, glowing faintly in the dim light of the station. Dokja accessed the shop and immediately spent 5,000 coins to upgrade his membership to gold. The upgraded interface opened a wider array of items and options. Without hesitation, Dokja purchased a support contract for 10,000 coins and a medium mana recovery potion for another 5,000 coins. Senga watched the process with curiosity, her eyes widening as the items appeared out of thin air. Her gaze shifted between Dokja and the glowing items. She asked about the nature of the items, but Dokja remained focused, explaining briefly that it was a contract that could turn an employer into an employee. As Dokja filled out the contract carefully, his thoughts raced. It had been an hour and a half since the scenario began, and Pildu had been fighting non-stop. There were still 6.5 hours left until the scenario's end. Pildu's supporting constellation, known for its limited resources, would be struggling by now. The constellation's audience consisted mostly of thrill-seekers who likely found the prolonged battle repetitive and had either stopped gifting coins or left the channel entirely. The constellation would be reaching its sponsorship limit, but it wouldn't let Pildu die without a fight. Dokja signed his name at the bottom of the contract and waited. He had anticipated this situation and knew exactly how to exploit it. Minutes ticked by, and the tension in the air grew heavier. Finally, a notification appeared before Dokja, confirming that Gong Pildu's supporting constellation was reaching out to others for assistance. This was the pivotal moment Dokja had been anticipating. His lips curled into a grin as his plan began to unfold. Another notification followed. The constellation, prisoner of the golden headband, dismissed the request with a snort, refusing to intervene. Meanwhile, Gong Pildu was barely holding on, his body battered and on the verge of collapse. Dokja addressed Pildu directly, his voice cutting through the chaos. He proposed an unexpected offer, not to Pildu himself, but to the constellation supporting him. Dokja made it clear that he wasn't a constellation and couldn't officially sponsor, but he offered something different, a contract that would change everything. Pildu, confused and furious, questioned Dokja's intentions. However, Dokja dismissed him, stating his offer was not for Pildu, but for his constellation. Notifications rapidly filled the air. The supporting constellation, Defense Master, revealed his nickname and expressed shock at Dokja's audacious suggestion. Baehyung, the overseeing dokkaebi, was equally stunned, berating Dokja for making such an unprecedented offer. He declared that no constellation would stoop to signing a deal with a mere human, but Dokja was unshaken. He calmly pointed out the harsh truth: the Defense Master was out of coins. The dokkaibi's disbelief deepened, but Dokja's internal thoughts pieced together the situation. The Defense Master was a constellation whose home world had been destroyed in a previous scenario. Without a surviving world, his stories had faded from existence. In the Star Stream, stories were the foundation of a constellation's power and coin generation. A constellation without stories had no way to earn coins and could not sustain their incarnations. The Defense Master wasn't like other constellations who treated their incarnations as expendable. He genuinely cared for Pildu. However, the absence of coins meant his power was limited, and Pildu's imminent death was proof of the constellation's inability to intervene further. Senga observed Pildu's battered state and hesitated, her voice trembling as she mentioned that he might not survive. Dokja silently agreed, knowing that without intervention, Pildu's life was at risk. His thoughts, however, focused on the opportunity before him. This was a critical moment for the Defense Master constellation. Pildu, barely able to stand, coughed violently, blood dripping from his lips. The notification appeared, signaling the arrival of the constellation's attention. The Defense Master wanted to discuss the terms of a contract. Another notification followed, confirming that the constellation had begun reviewing the offer. Even Baehyung, who had been observing, was stunned. Pildu, confused and weakened, barely managed to question what was happening. Dokja calmly explained, making it clear to Pildu that he was essentially being sold off. A new notification appeared, revealing that the Defense Master had added specific conditions to the contract. Dokja quickly examined the terms. The contract stated that Dokja must acknowledge the Defense Master's property rights, ensure Pildu's survival, and assist him in his growth. Dokja considered the terms. He had already planned to train Pildu and mold him into a useful ally, so the first two conditions weren't an issue. What truly interested Dokja was the third condition. The contract granted him command authority over Pildu, now designated as private property of the Defense Master. This authority could be used up to 10 times a day. Satisfied, Dokja nodded in agreement. He instructed Senga to administer a recovery potion to Pildu. Although confused, she followed through, understanding that this step was essential for clearing the main scenario. Pildu still disoriented, unsure of its purpose. Dokja directed Pildu to recover and prepare for the battle ahead. Pildu's anger flared as he growled about vengeance, his words laced with hostility. Despite his suspicions, he eventually opened the potion's lid. As the blue smoke surrounded his body, his wounds began to heal, and the damaged turrets were restored to their original state. Pildu, still fuming, muttered threats under his breath about what he planned to do once he was free. Without hesitation, Dokja activated the command rights granted by the contract. A notification confirmed its activation, and Pildu suddenly found himself unable to speak. His words were reduced to incoherent sounds as the command took hold. Dokja firmly instructed Pildu to continue fighting, making it clear that he was not to harm any of Dokja's companions. Bihyong, startled by the unfolding events, questioned Dokja's true intentions. It became apparent that Dokja had planned this from the beginning, his strategy unfolding step by step. Dokja simply shrugged, hinting at another pressing task that required his attention. Jihei, confused by Dokja's sudden announcement, questioned the timing. Dokja explained that someone had left to search for a rare item while others were struggling to survive. His tone was resolute as he expressed his intention to deal with that person. Inwardly, Dokja thought about Jung-hyuk. According to the story, Jung-hyuk had faced immense pain in his third regression, and Dokja feared that this might be the end for him. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the novel to confirm his suspicions. The scenario didn't align with what he expected. Jung-hyuk's recklessness baffled him. Hee-won noticed Dokja's distraction and questioned his behavior. Dokja dismissed her concerns, claiming to check the calendar. Her suspicion lingered, but she shifted the conversation, asking about the person Dokja was planning to confront. Dokja confirmed that this individual was far worse than Pildu. Dokja decided to leave Hyunsung and Senga behind to keep watch over Pildu. With Pildu defending the area from the monsters, the others would be safer for the time being. However, Dokja's thoughts lingered on someone else, someone who concerned him far more than Pildu. As Dokja prepared to leave, Jihei called out to him, questioning where he was heading. Instead of answering directly, Dokja told her she could come along, leaving her confused but intrigued. His focus shifted to Jung-hyuk. Dokja knew from the novel TWSA that Jung-hyuk had challenged Chungmaro's hidden dungeon multiple times in previous regressions. Out of the 8 attempts he made, he had failed twice, including during his 8th and 10th regressions. However, this was only Jung-hyuk's 3rd regression. His chances of success in this state were much slimmer. Dokja reasoned that Jung-hyuk had likely entered the hidden dungeon located near exit 1 of the station. It had already been 11 hours since Jung-hyuk entered, which left Dokja deeply concerned. The odds were against Jung-hyuk, and Dokja's instincts told him that if nothing changed, Jung-hyuk would meet his end in that dungeon. Dokja and his companions made their way to the entrance of the hidden dungeon located on the first underground floor. As they approached, a notification appeared informing them of their discovery. The message revealed that a hidden scenario had been unlocked, and their task was to defeat the master of the cinema dungeon. The area before them was unlike any other. A deserted movie theater loomed ahead, shrouded in an eerie stillness. Jihei seemed uncertain, questioning Dokja's decision to save Jung-hyuk. Meanwhile, Hee-won observed the scene with a touch of humor, commenting on the unusual romanticism of the setting. However, their curiosity about Dokja's motives grew stronger. Dokja's determination was clear, but his reasoning puzzled those around him. The constellation, secretive plotter, also expressed interest in his decision. Dokja's calm response, implying Jung-hyuk's usefulness, only added to their confusion. Deep down, Dokja understood why they were bewildered. After all, Jung-hyuk had always been a hostile presence, someone who would gladly turn against him at any moment. Yet here he was, rushing to his aid. As they stepped closer to the dungeon, Dokja's thoughts wandered to something Jung-hyuk had once said during his later regressions. Jung-hyuk had spoken of choosing the worlds where the most people could be saved, leaving the others behind. On the surface, it sounded noble, but Dokja knew better. Those abandoned worlds, their fates unknown, had always troubled him. What happens to a world where the regressor has died? Dokja wondered that does it reset along with the regressor, or does it continue to exist like a parallel universe? The uncertainty haunted Dokja. If those worlds continued to exist, they would face devastation without a regressor to guide them. For Dokja, this possibility was unacceptable. His true purpose in being here was not just to save Jung-hyuk, it was to prevent his death and stop him from resetting through regression. Lee Gil-young tugged on Dokja's sleeve, pointing out that all the posters on the walls had been torn down. He wondered aloud who might have done it, his curiosity evident. Dokja, paying little attention to the mystery, suggested they move upstairs. As they ascended, Hee-won struck up a conversation with Jihei, Jihei, asking if she was skilled with swords. Jihei's enthusiasm was clear as she expressed her love for them. The two quickly bonded over their mutual appreciation, exchanging remarks about the exhilaration of wielding a blade. Heewon noted the quality of Jihei's sword, and Jihei explained that it was a gift from her master. Heewon hesitated before mentioning her own weapon, though it was clear she felt self-conscious about it. Dokja, observing the interaction, felt a twinge of envy and wondered why Jihei wasn't as casual with him. Jihei candidly explained that she admired strong older women, leaving Dokja to sigh in resignation. Suddenly, Gilyong's demeanor shifted. He tugged at Dokja's clothes again and quietly signaled for silence. Someone was nearby. In an instant, Jihei drew her sword, her movements precise and ready for action. Dokja initially thought it might be Junghyuk, but the unfamiliar voices confirmed otherwise. From their position, they overheard snippets of conversation. The voices belonged to a group discussing information they had purchased with a significant number of coins. They mentioned something about profits, a disdainful tone lacing their words. Dokja listened carefully, piecing together the context of their discussion. The group continued up the escalator, where they spotted 4 figures gathered in the lobby on the first floor. The strangers seemed focused, unaware of Dokja and his companions for now. Jihei whispered her confusion to Dokja, noting that she didn't recognize the group from Chungmoro. Dokja speculated that the strangers might have entered the building through the ground floor. Jihei questioned how they could have done so, given the poison gas and the ongoing scenario. Dokja explained that each station had its own scenario with varying durations. These individuals must have completed their scenario earlier and moved on. As for the poison gas, Dokja revealed that the meat of a subterranean monster could neutralize it, allowing safe passage. Dokja pondered the unexpected situation unfolding before him. The mention of the prophets puzzled him deeply. They were never referenced in any of Junghyuk's regressions. At this point in time, Dokja believed that only he and Junghyuk should have knowledge about the hidden dungeon. Something unknown was altering the course of events, and Dokja couldn't figure out what was triggering this drastic change. As he observed the men speaking in the distance, a floating blue spotlight appeared above them. The bright glow surrounded their figures, and within seconds, they vanished entirely from sight. Heewon, startled by the scene, tried to grasp what had just occurred, while Jihei, standing nearby, stated the obvious. They had all disappeared. Dokja, lost in thought, wandered the area. His eyes scanned the remnants of the posters scattered on the walls. Among the torn pieces, there was one poster left untouched. The words inscribed on it caught his attention. A time forgotten by mankind and recreated. Dokja's expression tightened as frustration bubbled within him. Of all the posters Junghyuk could leave behind, it had to be this one. Suddenly, the light reappeared. This time, the spotlight was fixed on Dokja and his companions. The abruptness of the situation made Jihei and Lee Gilyong instinctively step back, but there was no escape from the glowing beam. A notification appeared, confirming that they had been hit by a projection beam. Another line followed, announcing the start of the screening for their floor. As the notification faded, their surroundings began to transform. It wasn't an illusion. Dokja could tell that something tangible was changing. His fourth wall ability didn't activate, a clear sign that the shift was genuine. The old linoleum floor disappeared beneath their feet, replaced by lush greenery and bushes. The once familiar reception desk and popcorn stand morphed into the dense foliage of a vibrant rainforest. Above them, the ceiling transformed into an endless blue sky devoid of clouds. Jihei looked around, muttering in disbelief, trying to comprehend their location. Dokja calmly explained that they were now inside a movie. He analyzed the situation carefully, piecing together the truth about the dungeon they had entered. This world had been created by the cinema master, a formidable figure who resided on the 8th floor of the dungeon. The unique feature of the cinema dungeon was its stages, each hidden within the posters. Dokja's thoughts turned to Junghyuk. That miserly bastard must have intended to clear all the stages alone, ensuring he could claim all the rewards for himself. The atmosphere grew heavier as Heewon sighed, acknowledging how complicated things were becoming. Jihei, curious and uneasy, tried to determine the theme of the movie they had been pulled into. Dokja, however, gave her no direct answer, insisting she would find out soon enough. Frustrated, Jihei pressed for answers, but her attention quickly shifted when the surrounding shrubbery rustled violently. Without warning, something large leapt out in front of Gilyong. It was a massive insect resembling a giant praying mantis. Jihei's immediate reaction was panic, her voice rising as she urged Gilyong to move out of its way. But instead of fleeing, Gilyong extended his hand toward the creature. To everyone's surprise, the massive insect didn't attack. Instead, it allowed Gilyong's hand to touch its exoskeleton. Jihei watched the scene in disbelief, struggling to process what she was seeing. Gil-young identified the creature as a Titanoptera, an insect from the Triassic period. Dokja's explanation of Gil-young's strange affinity left Jihei even more perplexed, but Dokja inwardly felt a glimmer of relief. In his mind, Dokja analyzed the situation. He considered that Jung-hyuk must have skipped this stage entirely, likely due to its theme. Stages like this, based on the movie's concept, often rewarded those who cleared them with treasures tied to the theme. Dokja was certain Jung-hyuk wouldn't have recognized the significance of this stage. This was an opportunity, as the stage held an important reward that Jung-hyuk had overlooked. Before Dokja could contemplate further, Gil-young called out to him in alarm. A deep rumble shook the ground, growing louder with each second. Something massive was approaching, tearing through the rainforest and smashing palm trees in its path. The source of the commotion soon revealed itself, a colossal reptilian beast. Its blood-covered muzzle glistened as it let out a deafening roar. Behind it, several bloody men came stumbling through the undergrowth, their faces twisted with terror. These were the same men who had entered the dungeon earlier. Their screams echoed as they begged for help, their desperation drowned out by the beast's thundering presence. Jihei's voice broke through the chaos as she whispered to Hee-won that she finally recognized the movie. Hee-won nodded in agreement, her expression mirroring Jihei's grim realization. Dokja, however, grinned with excitement as he studied the massive creature. It was a Tier 7 beast monster. For Dokja, its appearance only confirmed what he already suspected. The harder the hidden dungeon, the better the rewards waiting at its end. As the yellow eyes of the Tyrannosaurus Rex locked onto the group, a thunderous roar erupted, shaking the entire forest. The deafening sound was followed by the beast's massive tail sweeping through the trees, its force shattering everything in its path. The men who had been running moments earlier were struck down by the tail's powerful swing. They fell to the ground, coughing up blood as their bodies crumpled under the overwhelming impact. A notification appeared in Dokja's vision, alerting him that the 7th grade Tyrannosaurus Rex had recognized him. Dokja let out a quiet sigh as he steadied himself, understanding the gravity of the situation. Jihei, alarmed and panicking, questioned Dokja's intention to face the monster. However, Dokja remained resolute. If they wanted to find the exit, the fight was inevitable. He pointed toward a building in the distance, identifying it as the Central Research Lab, their destination. They were trapped inside a movie, and every movie needed a climactic finale. As the Tyrannosaurus activated its skill, carnivorous fear, an overwhelming sense of dread filled the air. However, Dokja's unique skill, Fourth Wall, shielded him completely from the effects of the beast's oppressive aura. Without hesitation, Dokja issued commands to the group. He instructed Gil-young to stay behind him, while Hee-won and Jihei were to spread out and flank the creature. Each member of the group sprang into action, understanding the urgency. Despite the chaos, Gil-young spoke up, sharing crucial information about the Tyrannosaurus. He explained that while the creature was far more agile than it appeared, it had limited vision and was vulnerable to attacks from the sides. Dokja, momentarily stunned, asked how Gil-young knew such details. Gil-young casually admitted that he had learned about it from an encyclopedia when he was younger. The T-Rex charged forward with terrifying speed, its massive body shaking the ground as it advanced. Dokja immediately planned to hold its attention, intending for the others to take advantage of the distraction. However, before he could finish giving instructions, Hee-won and Jihei were already in position at the creature's rear. Their quick reaction surprised him, but he was relieved. They knew exactly what they were doing. Dokja braced himself as the T-Rex's sharp teeth snapped inches away from him, followed by its heavy legs stomping dangerously close. He barely evaded the attacks, an electrifying thrill coursing through his body as he danced around the beast's assault. While he distracted the T-Rex, he trusted Hee-won and Jihei to deal significant damage from behind. Just then, Gil-young stepped forward, announcing his intention to help distract the monster. Dokja immediately protested, but before he could stop him, Gil-young acted. With a confident determination, Gil-young began making precise, intricate signals with his hands. From the surrounding foliage, the massive Titanoptera, the giant praying mantis Gil-young had befriended earlier, leapt into action. The insect charged at the T-Rex, stabbing its sharp limbs directly into the beast's eyes before quickly retreating. The T-Rex roared in pain, shaking its massive head as its vision blurred. The creature's yellow eyes moved erratically, struggling to track the Titanoptera, which continued to dart around and disrupt its focus. Dokja couldn't help but reflect on why Jung-hyuk had shown such interest in Gil-young. The boy's unique abilities were undeniable. Meanwhile, Hee-won and Jihei launched their attack from opposite sides of the T-Rex. Their weapons slashed through the creature's thick hide, blood spraying as deep cuts were carved into its body. With its stamina waning, the beast's movements grew sluggish. Recognizing the opportunity to finish it off, Dokja activated his skill, Blade of Faith. The Ether Blade's special option, tied to Unbroken Faith, triggered, converting its energy property into fire. The blade extended in size, flaming flames engulfing it as it roared to life. Without hesitation, Dokja charged toward the T-Rex's tail. As the massive creature hesitated in its movements, he climbed its thick tail and plunged the flaming blade into its tough hide. The T-Rex roared in agony, blood pouring from the wound as it writhed and thrashed. Dokja rammed the blade repeatedly into its body, flames spreading through the injuries and scorching the beast from within. The scent of burning flesh filled the air, sharp and heavy, causing Gilyong and Hee-won to momentarily flinch. The T-Rex's yellow eyes locked onto Dokja, filled with pain and desperation. Its gasps grew weaker until it finally collapsed to the ground with an earth-shaking thud, its massive body lying lifeless. A notification appeared, announcing that they had succeeded in being the first to hunt a 7th grade species, the Tyrannosaurus Rex. In the aftermath of the battle, Dokja turned his attention to one of the injured men lying nearby. Blood streamed from deep wounds caused by the T-Rex's claws, and his breaths were shallow and labored. Dokja tried to guide him, instructing him to breathe slowly, but the man's injuries were too severe. The man's voice trembled as he attempted to speak. He revealed fragments of information, mentioning the word prophets, and something about guardians of a revelation. However, before Dokja could gather more details, blood spilled from the man's mouth, and his life faded. Dokja's thoughts raced as he analyzed the situation. A revelation, a rare and absurd phenomenon, was unfolding before him. In 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, TWSA, only one person was known to have the future vision skill, and that was Anna Croft. But this wasn't her. The fact that someone else had this ability and sent a representative instead of coming themselves was telling. It could only mean one thing: there were others like him out there. After this realization, Dokja suggested a brief rest for the group. Once they had recuperated, they made their way toward the laboratory situated in the center of the island. As they ventured deeper into the building, Dokja's sharp eyes scanned their surroundings. In the inner corridor, he spotted several ampoules neatly arranged, one to enhance physique, another for magic power, one for agility, and one for strength. Each was a valuable resource. Meanwhile, his companions were absorbed in their own activities, busy feasting on the roasted meat of a recently slain T-Rex. Among them, Jihei's voice rang out, loud and playful, as she noticed Dokja inspecting the ampoules. Her teasing words drew everyone's attention to him, her tone laced with mock accusation. Startled, Dokja looked up, caught off guard by her sudden remark. She demanded to know whether he planned to hoard the ampoules for himself, her words dripping with playful suspicion. Dokja quickly dismissed her claim, denying any selfish intentions. Jihei, however, didn't let up. Her quick wit turned the situation into a light-hearted interrogation, calling on Hee-won for support. As she continued her playful banter, Dokja assessed her character profile, calculating her motives. Her request for the strength ampoule, delivered with an exaggerated plea of helplessness, made him smirk inwardly. Did she really think he would fall for that act? Hee-won suggested that since Dokja had found the ampoules, he should be the one to decide how they were distributed. Dokja's thoughts churned as he glanced at Jihei, a faint annoyance lingering in his mind. He didn't want to give her any ampoules, especially since she was aligned with Jung-hyuk. A message suddenly appeared in front of him, a notification from the constellation Demonic Judge of Fire. The constellation expected him to be fair. Dokja pondered briefly. He needed a solution that didn't blatantly show his reluctance, yet satisfied the constellation's expectations. Finally, he proposed a simple method to decide, a game of rock, paper, scissors, where the winner would claim an ampoule for every round. Jihei's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as she eagerly agreed, confident in her abilities. Hee-won, ever the voice of reason, questioned whether it was wise, pointing out that one person could potentially take all the ampoules. Jihei, unbothered, shrugged and replied that it would be good fortune for the winner. Dokja locked eyes with Jihei, a subtle smile forming on his lips. He activated his skill, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, his perception zeroing in on Jihei's intentions. Her first move was clear as day. She planned to play scissors. As the rounds began, the sound of laughter and teasing filled the air. The faint thrum of helicopter blades echoed in the distance, but the group's focus remained on the game. Jihei's confidence began to waver as round after round passed, each one ending in her loss. Her initial bravado faded, replaced with disbelief as Dokja claimed ampoule after ampoule. Nearby, Hee-won commented on the absurdity of their situation, questioning whether they had truly ended the movie. She noted that no one in the original plotline had hunted a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Dokja glanced her way, the hint of a smirk playing on his face, and casually remarked that while it wasn't in the movie, wasn't it more enjoyable this way? After all, the genre was action-adventure fantasy. It allowed for some improvisation. Finally, a message appeared before them. The Constellation Cinema Master was pleased with the movie's revised ending, granting them permission to proceed to the next floor. Dokja analyzed the situation quietly. The key to clearing the dungeon wasn't about recreating the exact endings from the movies, but producing a conclusion that pleased the Cinema Master. The Cinema Master, as Dokja understood, was all about action. This meant that monsters couldn't be taken out of the dungeon, but items could, like the stat amplification ampules they had found earlier, or the special ampule he received as a reward for defeating the Tyrannosaurus Rex. These ampules were temporary, only usable within the cinema dungeon, but vital for clearing the final floor. Dokja's thoughts shifted to Jung-hyuk, calculating that he might already be in a dire situation on the higher floors. The group boarded the helicopter, prepared to head to the next floor. A notification appeared, announcing that the first ending credit had been reached. The cast was listed: Dokja, Heewon, Jihei, and Gil-yong, as they each received 500 coins as compensation. The helicopter landed, and Dokja and his companions found themselves back on the ground floor. Without hesitation, they moved toward the escalator that led to the second floor. Their goal was clear: progress through the dungeon as quickly as possible. As they ascended, Jihei voiced her frustration, wondering how many floors they still had left to clear. Dokja responded with calm certainty, explaining that some floors had likely already been cleared by Jung-hyuk, so their progress might be faster than expected. Jihei then pointed out that they could only enter movies with intact posters, noticing that the posters tore apart after a movie was cleared. Heewon confirmed this observation. The group hurried to the next available poster, aware that time wasn't on their side. Dokja's mind raced as they moved. The cinema dungeon, he thought, was structured like a 9-story movie theater, including a basement. It was located just outside exit 1 of Chungmoro Station. To their advantage, all the posters for the second and third floors had already been torn, indicating those floors were cleared. He felt relief when he saw that Inception was among the cleared movies, but his thoughts lingered on Fighting Destination. How had Jung-hyuk managed to clear such a difficult movie alone? The group arrived on the 4th floor and entered their next movie scenario. Almost immediately, Jihei began to retch violently, clutching her stomach. Heewon knelt by her side, gently encouraging her to let it out. Jihei groaned about her seasickness, her face pale and strained. Dokja observed the scene and couldn't help but wonder how the naval warfare god, a constellation, had chosen someone like Jihei as an incarnation. Jihei turned to the movie they had entered, and her voice was filled with curiosity as she observed their surroundings. Dokja confirmed her suspicion. This was indeed the movie where the ship would sink. Jihei, despite her nausea, joked about Heewon being the female lead, likening her to Kate Winslet. She then turned her gaze to Dokja, her words laced with mockery, calling him the male lead, DiCaprio. However, mid-sentence, her seasickness returned and she doubled over, retching once more. Dokja couldn't hide his exasperation at the timing of her comment, shaking his head as they pressed on. A man in a clean suit stood nearby, his eyes fixed on the group. The resemblance to a character from the movie was uncanny, and his presence felt unnervingly real. Jihei pointed this out, commenting that all the lead characters seemed to be present. Her question about the movie's plot was swiftly answered by Gil-yong, who bluntly stated that the ship would sink. A simple yet precise summary of the scenario. Meanwhile, the man had been tightly bound, his expression wavering between anger and fear. Dokja acknowledged the situation, explaining that he had tied the man up because he was the antagonist. However, Jihei wasn't convinced that mere restraint was sufficient. Without hesitation, Jihei unsheathed her sword, her intent clear. She suggested killing the man, her reasoning rooted in their goal of pleasing the cinema master. Dokja hesitated, acknowledging her logic but feeling unsettled by the ease with which she made the suggestion. Heewon, observing the bound man closely, interrupted their debate. Her voice was filled with doubt as she remarked that the man didn't seem like a character in a movie. To her, he looked far too real, his expressions and movements eerily lifelike. Jihei remained firm, reminding everyone that there was no room for hesitation. It was either them or him. They were alive, while he was just a character, one meant to play the role of a villain. Even if he had once been a real person, there was no other choice. Heewon agreed without hesitation. Without delay, the blade descended, piercing through the man's chest. Blood gushed out, vivid and disturbingly real. Then, a system message echoed through the space. The theater owner was satisfied with the altered ending of the movie. As a result, the stern of the ship would now lead them to the next floor. Jihei, confident in her decision, expressed her satisfaction. There was no time to waste, especially with their master's life at stake. A new notification appeared, confirming that they had reached the second ending credit. Jihei was pleased with how quickly things had progressed. Meanwhile, Dokja's thoughts lingered on the words, character, real person. The distinction blurred in his mind, but there was no time to dwell on it. They pressed forward, following the system's guidance. Upon reaching reaching the 5th floor, a new message appeared, stating that they had entered the rewards room. Hee-won immediately noticed the difference. This floor had no movies to complete, only rewards waiting to be claimed. Ji-hae's excitement was evident as she took in the sight before them. The room was filled with various items, which looked like props used in different films. However, Dokja knew the truth. These were no longer mere props. They had transformed into real weapons and equipment. Though they couldn't compare to artifacts from constellations, they were still high-quality replicas and classified as grade A items. This reward was precisely why he had chosen to enter the cinema dungeon. As they explored, Hee-won approached a glass tube and gasped in amazement. Inside was a beautifully crafted sword, a grade A replica. She marveled at its sharp blade and lightweight design, admiring the craftsmanship. Dokja acknowledged that Hee-won finally had a proper sword now. However, there was one drawback. Each of them could only take 2 items from the room. Dokja considered their situation and decided that Senga should also receive an item. He asked Hee-won to choose something for her while he selected one for Hyunsung. Hee-won nodded in agreement and began looking through the available equipment. After scanning the room, Dokja picked up the Hercules shield. Replica, an A-grade shield. It was sturdy and well crafted, making it a perfect choice for defense. Meanwhile, Ji-hae, who had claimed to be a fan of superheroes, struggled to pull an item from the corner. When she finally managed to bring it into view, it was revealed to be Mjolnir. Replica, an A-grade blunt weapon modeled after the Thunder God Thor's hammer. Before she could secure it for herself, Dokja observed the weapon and noted that it was usually reserved for those with special strength. Ji-hae, overhearing, immediately protested, claiming she was special too. At that moment, Lee Gil-young approached from behind and casually reached for Mjolnir. Ji-hae tried to stop him, but it was too late. With surprising ease, Gil-young lifted the hammer. He swung it around effortlessly, showing no signs of struggle. The sight left Ji-hae stunned. She could only watch in disbelief as Gil-young asked Dokja if he could keep it. Seeing how naturally Gil-young wielded the weapon, Dokja agreed. The hammer suited him well. Ji-hae, still in shock, muttered her frustration, feeling that the situation was completely unfair. Meanwhile, Hee-won turned to Dokja and asked what he planned to take for himself. After some thought, Dokja selected the external reinforced suit, replica, an A-grade protective suit. As soon as he equipped it, system messages appeared detailing its effects. The suit would reduce damage from external attacks by 10%, enhance his ability to detect enemies, and improve his agility. It felt a little restrictive, but it was better than nothing. With their choices made, Dokja signaled that it was time to move forward. Internally, Dokja's thoughts shifted to the regressor. He wanted to see what Jung-hyuk was up to. However, upon reaching the 6th floor, Jung-hyuk was nowhere to be found. Ji-hae wondered aloud if Jung-hyuk had really been the culprit behind the previous events. Dokja, staying in character with the movie theme, remarked that there were still people who hadn't seen the full story unfold. He reflected on their luck in clearing the last remaining movie on the 6th floor. It had been a thriller with a twist ending, and as a result, they had received a unique reward. Dokja obtained the Sharp Observation Skill Book, a valuable ability that allowed him to analyze a target's movements and estimate their overall stats. While it wasn't a combat skill, it could still be highly useful, especially against individuals like Senga or Gil-young, whose character profiles were difficult to access. As the group moved forward, they came across more movie posters lining the walls. Hee-won noticed something strange. The posters had all been torn apart. This could only mean one thing. Dokja realized that Jung-hyuk was already in the boss room. If there were any remaining posters intact, they needed to find them quickly. Before they could advance any further, a blue spotlight enveloped them, and the surroundings began to change. A system message appeared, announcing that the screening for their floor was about to begin. Dokja cursed under his breath. There had been one more poster left to check. Now it was too late. The scene around them transformed. The scent of salt filled the air. Unlike before, this was not a cruise ship. The overwhelming stench of artillery lingered, and the sound of waves crashing against a vessel filled the atmosphere. As the boat rocked violently beneath him, Dokja instinctively turned his head, only to hear a desperate voice shouting in warning. Without hesitation, he dropped to the ground. In the next instant, a deafening barrage of gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the air, striking soldiers who collapsed in pools of blood. Cries of urgency filled the air as the soldiers, clad in old military uniforms, scrambled to protect the ship. The wind carried an eerie sense of unease as war raged around them. The turbulent Myeongyang Strait churned violently, waves rising and falling in a chaotic rhythm. In the distance, the steady, ominous beat of war drums echoed across the battlefield. Dokja clenched his teeth. There was no mistaking it. As a Korean, it was impossible not to recognize this film. Jung-hyuk had deliberately left them with one of the most challenging movies to clear. Hee-won's gaze was locked onto the horizon, her expression filled with disbelief. The sea stretched endlessly before them, but what truly stole her breath away was the sight of the enemy enemy fleet. 300 Japanese warships lined the waters, their presence an overwhelming force. Dokja's mind raced as he took in the situation. His first instinct was to assess their own forces, but something was wrong. Panic clawed at his thoughts, but he forced himself to remain calm. This battle was based on historical events, meaning there had to be a way to win. However, as he counted the ships at their disposal, his stomach twisted. They were missing 12 vessels. That shouldn't have been possible. A sinking realization hit him and he reached out, grabbing one of the sailors nearby. Urgency filled his voice as he questioned the soldier, demanding to know the whereabouts of their leader. The soldier stammered in confusion, unable to answer. Dokja's breath hitched. The truth slammed into him like a tidal wave. The cinema master had altered the plot. They were expected to fight the legendary Battle of Myeongnyang, but without Admiral Yi Sun-sin. Dokja's gaze swept the deck, searching for the one person who might hold the answer. His eyes locked onto Jihei. A notification flashed in his mind, sharpening his recollection of the story he knew so well. His voice cut through the chaos as he called out to her, questioning why an admiral known for naval warfare had chosen someone who got seasick so easily. She admitted that she had no idea, but there was one thing she had always been told. She was a descendant of a great admiral. Dokja felt his thoughts grinding to a halt as the pieces clicked into place. The revelation was absurd, yet undeniable. Jihei was the descendant of Admiral Yi Sun-sin. His mind drifted back to episode 40 of Ways of Survival, when this very fact had been revealed. Back then, the few readers still following the story had erupted in protest, outraged that a national hero's incarnation had been chosen purely because of bloodline. But now, standing here, facing an impossible battle, Dokja could only think of one thing. If history had been rewritten, then so had their fate. And whether they liked it or not, Jihei was their only hope of survival. Dokja watched as Jihei trembled, her eyes filled with tears. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her entire body shaking as she refused to move. Fear had completely overtaken her. A message appeared, signaling the gaze of the naval warfare god. The constellation was watching her with sorrow, silently urging her forward. But Jihei was not responding to anyone. Not to Dokja, not to the others. She was trapped in her own world. Dokja's voice was firm as he commanded her to get up, but she recoiled, shaking her head violently. She wanted no part of this battle. Her voice cracked as she shouted that the others should handle it without her. Dokja didn't waver. He asked if she could just hold on a little longer, but the words only made her tremble more. She lashed out, insisting that he had no idea what he was asking of her. But he did. He knew exactly why she was like this. Jihei froze as Dokja revealed the truth. This wasn't just about seasickness. This was her dead friend's favorite movie. A painful memory surged through her, as vivid as if she were living it again. The first scenario at Taipong Girls High School. The moment when her hands wrapped around her friend's throat, choking the life out of someone she had once laughed with. The horror of it had never truly left her. Her voice wavered as she demanded to know how Dokja could possibly know this. But he knew far more than just that. Dokja's thoughts were steady, piecing together the real reason behind her being chosen. Jihei had no love for the sea. She had no particular loyalty to the greater good. And yet, Admiral Yi Sun-sin had still picked her. The truth lay in her lineage. She was not a direct descendant of Yi Sun-sin, but of his closest comrade, Admiral Lee Aok-gi, a man who had fought alongside Yi Sun-sin in the battles of Danghangpo and Hansendo, a man who had remained by his side when false accusations of treason had been hurled against him, a man who had not left behind enough of a legacy to become a major constellation himself. It was an act of loyalty that had transcended time. Yi Sun-sin had chosen his old friend's descendant, not for her skill or righteousness, but because he could not bear to watch his comrade's bloodline spiral into darkness. He could not let Jihei become a monster after the sins she had already committed. A sudden notification signaled the start of a bounty scenario. The words appeared before Dokja's eyes. Those who seek death shall live. Those who seek life shall die. The conditions were clear. The naval warfare god had issued a call for help. The objective was set: encourage Jihei, Admiral Yi Sun-sin's incarnation, and lead the Battle of Myeongnyang to victory. A surge of power coursed through Dokja as he realized the implications. The great admiral's stigma was within his grasp. He could wield it without forming a support contract. There was no time to dwell on the details. Dokja grabbed Jihei by the shoulders, shaking her violently. Her body felt limp, her expression hollow. She was trapped trapped in her despair, drowning in guilt. But there was no time for hesitation. She had killed her friends to survive. That was an unchangeable fact. Whether she lived or died, forgiveness would never come. But if she stood up now, if she fought, she still had the chance to save others. Beyond them, Gilyong and Heewon were already overwhelmed. Enemy ships surrounded them, cannon fire tearing through the sea. Dokja barely had time to raise his shield as an incoming volley of attacks crashed against him. The force nearly sent him sprawling, but he stood firm. His voice rang out over the chaos, commanding, desperate. Jihei needed to wake up now, but she remained frozen. Her legs staggered beneath her as she stood on the deck, her breath uneven. This was a cursed scenario. Memories flooded her mind, visions of the friend she had strangled with her own hands. That day, the moment when everything changed. Tears streamed down her face, an endless torrent of grief. Her voice trembled as she called herself disgusting, undeserving of life. Dokja did not hesitate. He agreed. She was, and so was he. His mind twisted with the truth. He was no different from Jihei. She had killed her friends to survive. And he was using his knowledge of these characters, manipulating them, pushing them beyond their limits, all for the sake of his own survival. But survival was not something granted. It was something earned. Dokja's words carried the weight of reality. The past could not be erased. Redemption was not guaranteed. Atonement or disgrace, none of it mattered. The only thing that did was the will to live. And if she wanted to die here, then that was her choice. A final notification appeared. Your understanding of the character Jihei has increased. Jihei was drowning in a storm of dark emotions, resentment, self-contempt, and complete disillusionment with the world. Yet, beneath all of it, there was something far simpler, something stronger. She did not want to die. Her fingers tightened around the hilt of her sword as she forced herself to stand. Her body trembled, but her resolve solidified. She wiped away the tears that streaked her face. A powerful presence stirred. The constellation Maritime War God had responded to her will. Dokja knew how constellations worked. They acted as they pleased, never truly bound by the wishes of their incarnations. Many ignored their chosen warriors, even in the face of death. But when it came to their own stories, they never hesitated. No constellation ever missed the chance to intervene when their legend was at stake. A notification appeared. A new stigma had been granted. The third stigma of Sword Demon Jihei. It was the strongest she had ever received. The power that would one day shape her into a true maritime admiral. Jihei turned toward the sea, her gaze fixed on the overwhelming enemy forces. There were no allies. The battlefield belonged to her alone. She raised her sword, gripping it tightly as a brilliant radiance gathered at the tip. The light pulsed, sharp and unwavering, like a beacon cutting through the chaos. Dokja watched the scene unfold. In the end, his actions had only helped Yu Jung-hyuk. The protagonist's fate would grow stronger from this, but that did not mean he had gained nothing. Jihei's voice rang clear over the battlefield. Her words carried the weight of determination. She was not finished yet. There were still 12 ships left to fight with. The air shifted, water vapor rose, thickening into mist. Droplets scattered through the sky like falling stars. And then, 12 ghost ships emerged from the sea, their spectral forms gliding through the waves. The sound of war drums faltered as if caught in hesitation. Enemy cannons roared, sending a rain of shells toward the Phantom Fleet. But the ghostly ships remained untouched. The attacks passed through their translucent hulls, leaving no sign of destruction. The battlefield had changed. Jihei stood firm, her grip on her sword unyielding. She did not care about survival. If she could have her vengeance, she would gladly die where she stood. Before the Ghost Fleet, the enemy warships were completely overwhelmed. It was not just Dokja who was shocked. Heewon and Lee Gilyong also stared in disbelief. This was the true power of a stigma. This was the strength of the Great Admiral, a man who had never been pushed back in naval warfare. The last light of the sunset cast a crimson glow over the battlefield. Smoke curled over the sea, and from within the fading haze, the agonized screams of the Japanese soldiers echoed. The whirlpools of the strait swallowed the lifeless bodies one by one. Within an hour, the final enemy ship collapsed, sealing the battle's end. A series of notifications flickered in Dokja's vision. The theater owner was satisfied with the altered ending of the film. The fourth ending credit had been reached. The list of performers appeared. Dokja, Heewon, Jihei, Lee Gilyong. The system awarded them 500 coins as compensation. Almost immediately, more messages followed. The bounty scenario had been cleared. Then, another set of notifications flashed. Dokja had received a reward from the Maritime War God. A surge of anticipation filled his chest. Maybe he would gain Ghost Fleet. If he could acquire it, he would no longer need to envy Jihei's power. But when the notification notification appeared, it was not what he expected. Instead, a new stigma had been granted. Song of the Sword has been acquired. For a moment, Dokja thought he had misread it. Song of the Sword. This was originally a stigma that Jihei had obtained later in the story. Yet, instead of giving him Ghost Fleet, the Duke of Loyalty and Warfare had chosen to bestow this upon him. A final message appeared. The Maritime War God expressed gratitude. Dokja processed the implications. In a way, this stigma was more valuable to him than Ghost Fleet at this moment. If he had this power, he might be able to prevent the worst outcome on the 8th floor. This was an unexpected gift. A precious stigma, given directly from the Great Admiral himself. Maybe, just maybe, this would give him a better chance at survival. As the battlefield faded from view, the surroundings shifted. They were returning to the theater. The scenario had ended. It was an acceptable conclusion. The surroundings shifted once more, and the battlefield dissolved into darkness. The next moment, the scenery reformed, and the group found themselves back inside the movie theater. The battle had ended, but the exhaustion lingered in every movement. Jihei, breathing heavily, stood still, her gaze fixed on Dokja. Dokja faced her, his voice firm. There was no room for argument. Jihei needed to rest, and they had another mission ahead. She hesitated for a moment, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Then, she relented. The battle had drained her completely, and despite her reluctance, she knew she would only be a burden if she followed. Dokja turned away. There was no time to waste. Along with Heewon and Lee Gil-yong, he moved toward the next challenge, the 8th floor. As they climbed the stairs, thoughts filled Dokja's mind. There was no time to celebrate gaining a new stigma. The cinema master was not an opponent he could afford to face while looking after the now vulnerable Jihei. After everything he had done, saving Jihei, earning a new stigma, none of it would matter if this world collapsed due to Junghyuk's regression. The resources had already been used. The ampules and the coins he had saved had been spent to raise his stats. Now, there was only one thought in his mind, Junghyuk. He could only hope the regressor was still alive. They ascended the final staircase. A notification flickered into view that you have entered the 8th floor, the Heavenly Garden. The top of the theater was unlike anything below. It was a rooftop, an open space beneath a vast dome resembling an opera house. The floor was covered in a thin layer of green grass, an unnatural sight amidst the chaos of the scenarios. The moment Dokja stepped forward, he saw it, the one he had been looking for. Standing in the distance, Junghyuk remained unmoving. His back was turned toward them. A silence stretched across the group until Heewon finally spoke. Her voice broke through the quiet. She turned toward Dokja, confusion laced in her tone. Wasn't Junghyuk supposed to be in danger? Dokja's lips curled into a smirk. The regressor didn't look like someone who needed saving. Dokja ran toward Junghyuk and struck him on the back of the head. The frustration he had built up, thinking Junghyuk was in danger, made the impact feel satisfying. But something was wrong. Junghyuk remained still, his body unresponsive. Dokja hesitated, stepping closer. The situation felt unnatural. Junghyuk had died in the cinema dungeon before, not because he was weak, but because of sheer misfortune. Dokja's instincts warned him. This was not just an ordinary moment. Then he noticed it. A thin, sinister aura extended from Junghyuk, connecting to an old man seated on a chair on the 8th floor. Recognition struck immediately. This was the final boss of the cinema dungeon. A message appeared, confirming his fears that the theater master's simulacrum has been revealed. Dokja clenched his fists. He had arrived too late. The boss of the cinema dungeon was the complete opposite of Junghyuk in nature. Now, Junghyuk was nothing more than a hollow puppet controlled by the true enemy. Junghyuk's gaze locked onto Dokja, but there was no life in his eyes. Dokja's breath caught in his throat. A message appeared, confirming the worst. Simulation. The cinema master has control over Junghyuk. Dokja barely had a moment to react before Junghyuk moved. A powerful punch struck Dokja in the gut, the force so overwhelming that his body shot through the air like a missile. He crashed against the invisible wall with a sickening impact, pain exploding through his body. Blood spilled from his mouth as he gasped for air. His reinforced armor suit was already damaged, cracks forming from the sheer force of the attack. Before Dokja could recover, Heewon sprang into action. Her sword flashed as she unsheathed it, her expression set with determination. But Dokja knew the truth. She wasn't strong enough to face Junghyuk yet. He tried to warn her, but no sound escaped his throat. Grinding her teeth, Heewon activated her skill, Demon Slaying. Her energy surged, and she dashed forward. Junghyuk, sensing the incoming attack, snapped his gaze gaze toward her. His instincts flared, warning him of danger. Hee-won leaped into the air, her blade igniting with power as she struck down. But Jung-hyuk moved effortlessly, dodging the attack with precision. Before she could react, he grabbed her wrist in an instant. A moment of shock crossed Hee-won's face before Jung-hyuk struck. His attack landed directly on her, sending her flying through the air in an acrobatic spiral before she crashed onto the ground. Hee-won panted, pushing herself up. The battle wasn't going to be easy. Before she could fully recover, Jung-hyuk dashed forward. His skill, 100 Step, activated, and he closed the distance in an instant. At that moment, Ji-hae rushed up the stairs. Just as she arrived, Hee-won was thrown back by the force of Jung-hyuk's devastating attack. Ji-hae's eyes widened as she saw Hee-won crash against the ground. Jung-hyuk moved again, dashing toward Ji-hae with terrifying speed. His fist, filled with destructive force, was just an inch away from striking. Ji-hae barely had time to react. Her breath hitched as she whispered under her breath. His fist smashed into the wall instead, sending cracks spreading through the space around them. The shockwave rippled outward, shaking the entire floor. Ji-hae at the last moment managed to dodge, slipping away in a blink. She turned, her expression unreadable. Dokja's voice finally broke through, raw with urgency. Jung-hyuk wasn't their target right now. They had to go for the Cinema Master. The Cinema Master watched from a distance, a sinister grin spreading across his face as the battle unfolded. Ji-hae, her fury ignited, dashed toward him, determined to strike. But before she could reach her target, Jung-hyuk moved beside her, matching her speed effortlessly. Without hesitation, he delivered a devastating kick straight to her face, cutting off her attack. Hee-won wasted no time. She surged forward at an incredible speed, her sword flashing as she joined the fight. For a brief moment, Hee-won and Ji-hae's eyes met. Their movements synchronized, their swords slashing toward Jung-hyuk in perfect unison. It was a powerful combination, kendo and sword training, a technique strong enough to bring down even monstrous creatures like the T-Rex. But Jung-hyuk was different. He evaded their attack with impossible precision, leaping high into the air to escape. Hee-won, refusing to relent, activated her skill, the Time of Judgment. At the same time, Gil-young unleashed Thunder of Mjolnir, sending a surge of electrified energy crackling through the space. The air trembled as lightning bolts lashed toward Jung-hyuk, illuminating the battlefield with their sheer power. But it was useless. Jung-hyuk countered the attack effortlessly. His lightning resistance nullified the effect and the energy dispersed into nothingness. At the same time, the constellations of the absolute good fell silent at Hee-won's request, preventing her skill from fully activating. Her frustration surged. She had called for power, but none had answered. Jung-hyuk didn't hesitate. As he descended from the air, he struck Hee-won with an unrelenting force. The impact sent her flying, her sword slipping from her grasp as she rolled across the ground. Ji-hae, attempting to counter, was met with a brutal flying kick. The force of the attack sent her crashing to the ground, unable to move. Dokja had expected this. Jung-hyuk had always been ruthless in battle, but never without reason. His strength had always been overwhelming, but this was beyond what Dokja had imagined. Checking Jung-hyuk's character profile, Dokja's heart pounded. The information confirmed the worst. Jung-hyuk was currently unconscious. It all made sense now. His transmission stigma had already activated. This ability allowed him to recall and reawaken the skills he had learned throughout his past regressions. Dokja turned to Gil-young, his voice firm as he placed his trust in him. Gil-young understood immediately and nodded, his expression resolute. Without hesitation, he began murmuring something under his breath. There was no other choice. Dokja had to use everything he had. He reached for the Tyrant T-Rex's DNA ampule and activated it. A surge of power erupted within his body. His stats skyrocketed instantly, every fiber of his being infused with overwhelming strength. His muscles tensed, their potential fully unleashed. His movements felt sharper, faster, and his heart pounded with an unfamiliar energy. The gaps in his lacking skills were filled with sheer raw power. As his body adjusted to the surge, another skill activated, White Star Weapon Aura. He tightened his grip on his weapon, determination blazing in his eyes. He didn't have the same level of skills as Jung-hyuk, but with this overwhelming boost in stats, he could make up for it. Jung-hyuk's skill levels weren't at their peak yet. This was his chance. Across from him, Jung-hyuk responded. He activated Blue Star Weapon Aura, his blade radiating an intense energy. Without hesitation, they both charged at each other. The clash was instant. Blades met with relentless force, the impact sending sparks flying in all directions. Neither Dokja nor Jung-hyuk backed down. The pressure was immense, the weight of the battle pressing down on Dokja as he struggled to hold his ground. His grip on the blade tightened. His body, despite its enhanced strength, trembled under the sheer force of Jung-hyuk's attacks. A thought flashed through his mind. He was barely keeping up. Even with the increase in stats, he could feel the difference. If he didn't find a way soon, he wouldn't last. Dokja activated omniscient reader's viewpoint. With the skill, he could now read Junghyuk's mind. Deep within Junghyuk's thoughts, pain resonated. How many times more? Would he have to repeat this? Dokja felt his stomach tighten. Has he already reached this point? His anger flared, pushing aside any hesitation. He couldn't afford to hesitate. In one swift motion, Dokja launched a devastating uppercut. His fist slammed into Junghyuk's chin, snapping his head back. Junghyuk wobbled from the force of the blow, but his mind was far away. The cycle of regression played out in Junghyuk's thoughts, an endless loop of loss and erasure. His companions lost every time. The histories wiped clean. If he regressed again, everything would reset, and once again, the endless repetition would begin. Dokja, still reading Junghyuk's mind, understood the source of the problem. The Cinema Master's control over Junghyuk wasn't due to physical power. It was the result of Junghyuk's unstable state of mind. His stats were weak, but the enemy possessed the most advanced mental attack skills. If Junghyuk's mental barrier had been at least level 8, none of this would have happened. Junghyuk's thoughts were full of doubt. What am I even fighting for? Dokja's grip tightened, fury building. You call yourself the main character. This was only his third regression. Dokja had every right to be furious. What happened to the resolution he made after his first regression? Junghyuk's mind echoed, I am the only living thing left in this world. Dokja was enraged. As the reader of 3,149 episodes of TWSA, you promised yourself not to think like this. You vowed to live for the greater good, even if you couldn't find the will to go on. Their swords clashed again with a deafening clang. Dokja's mind raced, overwhelmed by emotion. Who am I speaking to right now? Why did his skin burn? Why were his eyes tearing up? Junghyuk's mind repeated the thought, sinking deeper into despair. He was alone. Dokja's fury ignited into something uncontainable. Alone? After everything they had gone through to get here, Junghyuk says he's alone? His anger surged as he remembered the countless moments Junghyuk had faced. Dying in the cinema dungeon, crying over his dead sister, the betrayal by the prophet, the joy of having a child, and then losing that child, going mad with grief. The battles fought against the Demon King, the returnees, the outer gods, and the reincarnated. Each struggle, each painful memory had been witnessed by Dokja through the episodes of TWSA. How could Junghyuk claim to be alone after all that? Their swords clashed once more, the sound reverberating through the space. Dokja's thoughts boiled with the weight of the past. He too had kept reading, fighting to survive. But then, for a moment, he realized he may have gone too far. He had only intended to stall for time, not to push so hard. Junghyuk launched into the air, swinging his sword with precision. Dokja blocked the attack, the force of the blow sending debris flying. His breathing was ragged as he refocused, but something was off. Was it an illusion? For just a moment, a faint light returned to Junghyuk's hand. Dokja's heart thumped, something he couldn't understand. His mind raced as he watched Junghyuk's gaze lock onto him, sharp and unwavering. The message that appeared in his view startled him. The excessive immersion has caused the fourth wall to shake. Could it be? Was Junghyuk beginning to regain his senses from the words Dokja had spoken? Was it truly that simple? But before any answers could form, the Cinema Master intervened, using his simulation to strengthen his control over Junghyuk. Junghyuk screamed in agony, his mind succumbing once more. Dokja knew there was no way it would be this easy. His gut twisted in realization. A sunfish wasn't called that for no reason. Junghyuk dashed in, his sword clashing with Dokja's. The power of Junghyuk's blue star weapon aura surged, growing stronger with each moment. Dokja's mind raced. Fighting against the protagonist was unfair. How had Junghyuk gotten stronger so quickly? Dokja glanced at Lee Gil-yong, whose nose was bleeding. It was clear. This was the moment to act. In his mind, Dokja knew Junghyuk would grow much stronger in the future, far beyond his own capabilities. But now, with all his strength, perhaps he could overpower him just this once. Dokja activated Unbreakable Faith's special property. The ether affix changed to fire. The fire ether blazed into existence, filling the empty space with its intense heat. Junghyuk staggered back, surprised by the sudden attack. He could feel the intensity of it, but it was already too late. Dokja unleashed the Stigma, Sword Song. This was the naval warfare god's Stigma, one of the most powerful combat buffs. Though the effect was randomized, Dokja had no choice but to make do with what he had in this critical moment. The naval god's phrase engulfed Dokja's sword. The fire ether combined with the other elements, creating a storm of energy that surged toward Junghyuk. Hyuk. The attack was fierce, like a thunderstorm crashing down on the battlefield. The fire ether transformed into arrows, relentlessly bombarding Jung Hyuk. This powerful strike couldn't be sustained long due to Dokja's limited magic power, but for now, it would have to suffice. The air was filled with the sounds of the attack. The arrows rained down on Jung Hyuk, and numerous red wounds appeared across his body. For a moment, Jung Hyuk faltered. Dokja began running, spotting the cinema master in the distance, his body stiffening. But before Dokja could reach him, Jung Hyuk activated the skill resurrection. The healing power surged through him, and in an instant, he was up and chasing after Dokja once more. Dokja cursed under his breath. Jung Hyuk had already recovered, and the situation was becoming dire. Dokja's focus shifted to Gil-young, whose body trembled in fear. Blood streamed from his nose as he struggled to stand, his voice broken by panic. Gil-young, desperate, realized that to face a monster, he needed to summon one. From the cracks in the broken dome, a massive insect emerged. Its body was monstrous, like a giant praying mantis, the king of insects. The ground trembled as it clawed its way through the debris, its size making the roof seem fragile. The theater master screamed in surprise as the enormous insect came closer. Gil-young, barely able to hold himself together, let out a shaky laugh, calling the creature Titano. The colossal mantis flew toward the theater master, but before it could strike, Jung Hyuk intervened. With a swift motion, he used the skill-strong self-defense level 4, blocking the attack. The theater master, believing he had the upper hand, laughed at the turn of events. Dokja, enraged, rushed toward the theater master, sword in hand. The theater master, in an attempt to halt Dokja's advance, activated his powerful skill, mind control. The world around them began to distort, and illusions flooded the space. These were no ordinary illusions. They felt real, almost tangible. They were an advanced form of cognitive manipulation designed to overwhelm the mind. This was the same technique that had been used on Jung Hyuk before, but Dokja activated his personal skill, Fourth Wall, to push through the mind-bending effects. The complexion of the theater master shifted as he dug deeper into Dokja's mind. His eyes widened in fear. He found himself plunged into an abyss. His mind flooded with memories from the pages of the novel. The text emanated a faint, ghostly light as they hovered in the dark void of his mind. The fourth wall took its effect, and light began to emanate. With one final swing, Dokja's blade of faith crossed the theater master's neck. A brilliant, blinding light erupted from the theater master's body. It was as if a divine force had struck him down, or as though he had broken a forbidden taboo. The light engulfed him, and in an instant, he was destroyed, vanished without a trace. Dokja stood over the remains, his mind blank, trying to process what had just happened. Messages popped up, indicating that the clear condition for the hidden scenario had been met. Dokja was certain that Jung Hyuk had used his skill on him, yet for some reason he remained unaffected. He questioned if it was due to the fourth wall protecting him. That was what he had counted on, but uncertainty still lingered. Before he could think further, Gil-young lost all strength and collapsed into his arms. His small frame was completely limp, his consciousness fading. At the same moment, the barrier that had covered the ceiling vanished. Dokja's gaze shifted to the insect king, watching as the creature suddenly turned away and fled. There was no hesitation in its movement, as if all interest in the battle had disappeared in an instant. A deep breath left Dokja as relief washed over him. The fight was over. He surveyed the rooftop. Hyewon approached, her expression tense but relieved. Nearby, Jae stood, though her face was badly swollen from the battle. She was unable to speak, but she was alive, and that was enough. A notification rang out, signaling the approaching end of the scenario. The battle below was also reaching its conclusion. Dokja took in the sight of the ruined city, now eerily silent in the morning light. The faint glow of dawn crept over the destruction, illuminating the collapsed buildings and shattered streets. The poisonous fog that had once covered everything had disappeared, but the city was now completely trapped. A massive transparent dome enclosed Seoul, stretching endlessly in all directions. Although small cracks had begun forming along its surface, the barrier remained intact, cutting them off from the outside world. Hyewon exhaled heavily as she looked over the devastation. The city of Seoul had fallen. Nearby, Gil-young lifted his hand and pointed toward the sky. From a distance, streaks of light cut through the horizon, a meteor shower. However, this was unlike any before. The number of meteors was far greater. Dokja recognized what this meant. The hall was about to open. These meteors were not just falling here, they were descending all over the world. Hyewon stood in silence, gazing at the sky as the new phase of their struggle loomed ahead. As the dark sky loomed over them, Gil-young turned to Dokja, his young eyes filled with curiosity. He asked if Dokja was going to make a wish. Dokja, deep in thought, questioned the point of wishing upon the very cause of this calamity, but he responded nonetheless, telling Gilyong that he had already made his wish. Gilyong, eager to know, asked what it was. Before Dokja could say anything, Heewon spoke, reminding them that a wish wouldn't come true if it was spoken aloud. Dokja's wish remained unspoken, yet clear in his mind. He wished to survive, to see the epilogue of the novel, a story he had followed for years, one that had now become his reality. When the sun rose again, it would only bring a new hell awaiting them. At that moment, a message appeared before him. The hidden scenario had been completed. The third main scenario, emergency defense, had concluded. But before there was even a chance to breathe, another notification followed. The fourth main scenario was about to begin. Dokja was caught off guard. The third scenario had barely ended, yet the next was already approaching. He hadn't expected it to come this fast. Turning to Jihei, he instructed her to stay with Junghyuk. Jihei hesitated, questioning if that was the right decision. Dokja, however, was firm. She wouldn't be of much help in the situation unfolding below, and if Junghyuk woke up in his current state, he could become another problem. All she needed to do was let him know when that happened. Jihei gave a small nod in agreement. As Dokja looked down at Junghyuk's unconscious form, he felt the urge to hit him on the head once more. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.